Now, the US Supreme Court has upheld a law banning TikTok from operating in America. That's unless the platform is sold by its Chinese parent company. The justices agreed the risk to national security from TikTok's Chinese ownership outweighs concerns about limiting freedom of speech. The ban would come into force from Sunday. TikTok has around 170 million users in the US. President-elect Donald Trump says he will review the Supreme Court ruling and then decide on TikTok's future. Let's cross over to our correspondent, Janelle Dumalaon, who is in Washington, D.C. Janelle, TikTok says the site will go dark on Sunday if the justices fail to block the ban. So is that essentially what's going to happen then?
That is what TikTok's lawyer said would happen on a Friday, last Friday, during oral arguments before the Supreme Court. But we really haven't heard what they will do now following the Supreme Court ruling. We haven't heard a statement from them since. But they do have quite a few options, and that includes going dark. So that means users might see a pop-up message when they try to open the app that directs them to a website that explains the ban and also allows them to download their content. So that's one option. Secondly, they could also get ByteDance to sell TikTok before Sunday. But that is a massive undertaking. We're talking of a price tag between $40 billion to $50 billion. And TikTok has repeatedly signaled that that is not, in fact, what they want to happen. The third option is that they do nothing and essentially allow the ban to take place. So that would mean new users would not be able to find TikTok on the app stores of Apple or Google, while existing users would still be able to use the app, but they might not be able to update the app, and over time, that would render the app unusable. But you know, a lot of this also depends on whether there is some kind of intervention from Donald Trump when he is in office on Monday. That is going to be the other half of this equation, and that is the next big thing to watch out for.
Just give us a bit of background. Remind us how all of this came about. How do we get to where we are now?
Well, just to rewind a little bit, let's not forget that it was Donald Trump who first wanted to see TikTok banned via executive order in August 2020. He was the one that said TikTok posed a national security risk because TikTok, of course, collects millions of user data from Americans. And because it has a Chinese parent company, that would mean that it's vulnerable to pressure from the Chinese government to overturn that data or manipulate that data for the Chinese government's aims, say. However, it's also worth pointing out that there are no Western social media platforms in China itself. But it really wasn't until last year, the middle of last year, where we saw a bipartisan bill that would ban TikTok unless it got rid of its Chinese parent ByteDance by January 19. Now, for its part, TikTok argued that that violated its free speech rights and the free speech rights of its users. And that case landed all the way to landed in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court clearly found the national security argument much more compelling than the free speech argument, and that led us to the decision that we saw today. But again, Donald Trump has had a change of heart since on TikTok. He credits TikTok with having helped him won votes, especially from the youth, and he is reportedly looking at ways to overturn or delay the ban.
So briefly, Janelle, what would need to happen for TikTok to remain available to people in the US?
I'm afraid that's not really a brief question. Trump said that he will decide and that he will make a decision, but not quite what he is going to do. So he could, for example, force the DOJ not to enforce that ban. So that would mean Apple and Google would not be penalized if they continued to host TikTok on their app stores. But if you're Apple and Google, you might not want to risk running afoul of the law if it exists, and because what if it is suddenly enforced? They could be subject to hefty fines. The other thing that Trump could do, of course, is that he could try and get Congress to repeal it. But once again, this was a bill that saw broad bipartisan support. As such, that could be very difficult. He could also delay the ban by 90 days, but TikTok has to show that there is evidence that a process of sale has indeed started. So sorry for not being brief there, but those are just some of the options that are on the table for Donald Trump, and it's going to be an interesting few days regarding the future of this app. 170 million users will be watching.
Janelle, thank you so much for that. That's our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Janelle Dumalaon.